Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast on competition law in digital markets in Latin America by the Center for Entertainment, Technology and Information Law, CENTE. We are here today to discuss the key issues, relevant topics, and the proposed solutions by experts on competition and innovation policy in Latin America. The purpose of this project is to open the debate in society and policy making regarding how to approach regulation and enforcement in digital markets. To lead this discussion, we have invited some of the most experienced professionals in competition, technology, and innovation to help us lead this debate. Today, I want to introduce you with our guest, Mr. Geoffrey Manne. He is the president and founder of the International Center for Law and Economics and is a distinguished fellow at Northwestern University Center on Law, Business, and Economics. He holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Chicago, and he is an expert in economic analysis, especially on antitrust, consumer protection, telecommunications, and technology. Before founding the ICLE, he headed up the program on law and economics in the academic engagement program by Microsoft Legal Department. Mr. Manne publications have appeared in numerous journals, mainly on competition law, technology, regulation, and the enforcement of these laws. Welcome, Geoffrey, to our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so to start today, part of our project has focused on getting on the basis and getting just setting the stage for this discussion about competition and innovation policy in Latin America. From that perspective, we would like to begin by addressing what is competition. What is the essence of competition? Because we're always talking about a lack of competition. So how is competition addressed in legal systems? How is competition addressed in industrial policies? And when we talk about competition, how can it be approached regarding digital markets?
Yeah, it's an important question, and I don't think people ask it enough. So I'm delighted that you have asked it. I think the important thing about competition is understanding that it is not really about sort of small businesses that are vying with each other for shares of an existing market. I mean, that does happen. But really, the process of competition is all about discovering new facts, discovering new things that can't be determined otherwise. This is the famous economist Friedrich Hayek's approach to understanding competition as a discovery procedure. But I think it's really crucial. I think it's really hard it seems obvious, and yet it's often hard to incorporate into the way we think about laws governing competition. So the important thing about competition is that it's the process by which we figure out what people want, how much people want of that thing, how much they'll pay for it, what sort of attributes they would like in the products and other things that they demand. If we knew all of that stuff, we could just have government provide everything, or we could have government pick a firm and say, here, we know that everybody wants these widgets. Please provide them at the price of £10 or whatever. But of course, we don't know that. We don't know much of anything. And it is the process of firms trying to outdo the other firms, of companies that say, well, I want more money, I want more profit, and so I'm going to try to offer something that people want more. It's through this process of trial and error, endless process of trial and error, that we find out what people want, and like I said, what they're willing to pay for it and how much of it they want. That's not what we colloquially think of competition. That we think of is usually something that we described as so-called perfect competition. The idea that there is many small businesses as possible competing for a share of a market, and in competing, it assumes that they know what people want, that there is, in the models that have established this idea, there's homogeneous goods, no transaction costs, perfect information. It was never really meant to describe reality, and yet it has emerged as kind of this ideal form of competition. And that is, again, these small firms that know everything, and it's just the more firms you have providing the things that people want, that we seem to know that they want, the cheaper those things will be. And the problem with that is that we've learned over many years of economic analysis and observing the world that doesn't actually lead to, or that forcing a market to have that kind of attribute to it doesn't actually lead to people getting the things they want at the prices they want them in the amounts that they want them. It turns out that, among other things, innovation is extremely important. And that model assumes that we already know everything. And so we don't need to find out new ways of doing business, new products, new technologies, and things like that. We again, in this model, we know everything. So we get no innovation in that world. You also have to have firms that realize that there is a gain to doing better than the firms they're competing with. You want them to try to outdo each other. And part of that is outdoing the other firms and capturing so much of the market that maybe at times you end up, instead of having 100 firms competing to provide the same product, maybe you have 2 firms. All the other firms have gone out of the market. They've all exited the market because they can't economically, efficiently provide what the other firms can. This doesn't mean a market is not competitive. Maybe there are only 2 players in the market. Maybe there's only 1 player in the market. That doesn't mean the market is not competitive. That may very well mean that 1 firm or 2 firms, or in some cases it may indeed be 10 firms, have outperformed the others, and that in fact, in some particular markets, we'll talk about this more in particular with respect to digital markets, the most desirable thing, the most efficient thing, is for there to be only a small number of firms providing whatever the good is. I'm being theoretical here, but we could be more concrete. Let's say a search engine, Google. Everyone knows that Google has a large market share. Everyone uses Google to do search. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but we'll talk a little bit about why that might be appropriate, and the fact that Google is far and away more successful than the other firms that offer search, internet search. The fact that they have succeeded so much doesn't in any way mean that there isn't competition.
Thank you very much. I would like to take on your last idea there on how this competition may develop in digital markets. But before, I would like to talk about innovation, because that's also something that really comes up in these discussions. What is innovation? Why do we seek innovation? Is there a definition from the economic perspective? And then relating to innovation, we can go back to digital markets, because I think that's an important point there.
Yeah, great idea. Innovation is even harder to define than competition. But I think we have a fairly good sense of what it is. Innovation is new ideas that lead to greater productivity and or consumer well-being. What's different, which competition also does. So what's different from competition per se is that innovation is the process by which new ideas emerge to improve things. Rather than simply revealing what people want and how much they're willing to pay for it and what the efficient price is, this is about finding new products, finding new ways of doing business, finding new things that don't currently exist in the market, and thereby improving everyone's welfare overall. And productivity, as I mentioned, is a really important part of that. Sometimes the innovation is technological, and there may be obvious ways that improves productivity. So you can think of the word processor. The word processor was an innovation. It was, of course, built on the back of many other innovations, not least of which the personal computer. But before the word processor, we had typewriters, we had, writing by hand, we had, quill and ink before that. Obviously, we're able to write, process ideas, record ideas, store ideas with vastly greater ease and productivity with the word processor than with pen and ink. So you can easily say and see how something like the word processor is an innovation. It's clearly increased productivity. As I mentioned also, innovations are things that improve people's well-being. And that, of course, can be, any number of things. Productivity itself improves people's well-being. But of course, there may be new ways of delivering the things that people want already, but it's a new way of getting them the thing in a way that's cheaper or better. So maybe the microwave is an example of this. Some people hate microwaves, but for many people, right, the move from a sort of an oven to a microwave dramatically reduced cooking time of a lot of different things. And it wasn't that, I guess in some ways the microwave might have changed the kind of food we eat, but for the most part, the microwave just changed the way we obtained the thing we already wanted, which was the piece of broccoli or whatever you put in the microwave. It's just you get it faster now, and that's better. So the other aspect of innovation that I have to mention that I think is in some ways the most important and the most hidden is what I might call business model innovation or process innovation. And these are innovations that are far less sexy. They're never showing up on the cover of Time magazine. But these are innovations in the way we do business, in the way companies are structured, in the way products are offered, and most importantly, in the way a company itself obtains new information, processes that information, and turns it into technological or other sorts of advances. So again, let me give you an example here. The platform, the digital platform that we'll be talking about in a minute in these digital markets. Google is one, Apple is one, Facebook/Meta is one. Facebook is a good example. Facebook is something that facilitates a what we call a multi-sided market. It enables advertisers and consumers of information and providers of information to all come together in a way that they can't really efficiently do on their own. It's not exactly that the product is new, although indeed what emerged, Facebook is a sort of, in some ways, a kind of novel product. But what's really innovative about these companies is that they figured out how to attract advertisers to fund the thing that they're offering, how to attract users, how to attract people to provide information in these really complicated ways that have facilitated these enormous platforms that people use on I was going to say a daily basis, but honestly on a minute-by-minute basis in some cases. That form of organization, that multi-sided platform is itself a business model innovation. It is an innovation that facilitated new ways of doing business that weren't previously available. And it's not super sexy, as I said. It really goes to, sort of technical behind the scenes, the way bits are organized and the way your divisions of your corporation are organized. But it's extraordinarily important. And so, to sort of sum up what I've been saying, innovation is the thing that advances us from whatever the status quo is to a level of higher productivity or higher value in the things that we enjoy. It is the driver of economic growth. It is, in some ways, it is the most important concern. It should be a component concern of all aspects of government. They should all be ensuring that we're not stifling innovation and that indeed, where it's practical, that we are improving innovation, because it is innovation that will make people wealthier and happier citizens. In digital markets, we see, a couple of things. Innovation is extremely important in digital markets, and the innovation in digital markets is of both types, both technological and this business model innovation. I already described some of the business model innovation that's there. Some of the technological innovation is obvious. Artificial intelligence is a technological innovation that is obviously improving the products that we currently enjoy, and in some cases creating whole new services and products that we didn't even know we wanted. What's interesting about innovation in these digital markets is how new technology, and in some cases new ways of doing business, are incorporated into the products and into the services that are being provided. Let me explain what I mean by that. let's go back to the Google search example. When Google search first came on the scene, it offered what we call the 10 blue links results. If you search for something in Google, you would get a list of links to other pages that might have some relevance to the query that you put into the Google search. But it was always links to other sources. And when it initially started, you got 10 of them on the first page, but then you reload the page and you'd get more. So 10 blue links. Oh, and they were blue. They were hyperlinked, so they were blue. So 10 blue links. Now, the thing is that Google realized over time, and the technology developed such that they learned that they were able to do this, that what people really wanted were in many cases, were answers to questions. They didn't necessarily want a link to another website that might be able to answer the question. Better not to have to go to the other website. They might actually like the answer to show up right there on Google. Now, again, part of that was technological. Google learned over time, as other companies have as well. I mean, every day they're learning better how to organize, process, and extract value out of information. So there was a technological component to this. But that idea of providing literal answers to questions instead of just sending you to another page on the internet was a real change in thinking for a company like Google. Google was, I can't remember their motto exactly, but it was organized to bring to something about organizing the information of the world. Their objective was to organize the information, not necessarily to provide the information. But people really wanted to provide the answers to questions like when how far is it to New York from Bogota? Maybe you're asking that because you want to drive from Bogota to New York. So they might tell you how far it is. They might send you to have a bunch of links that talk about the ways to get from Bogota to New York. And they might also just give you an answer, provide a map that shows the route, tells you how far it is. And even if you click on it, gives you all the turn-by-turn instructions for how to get there. I think there's no question that that's an innovation. It's an innovation in the way they are collecting, organizing, and providing information. But it's built on a technological innovation, but itself is something in between. It's sort of it's an innovation in the user interface. It's a I don't know, not sure exactly what you'd call it, but it's not an earth-shattering disruptive innovation, but it really was a change in the way they were providing. They were there and still are providing. What's critical about this in understanding the sort of overarching question of how we should regulate competition in these markets is when innovations like Google providing answers to questions come along, they always are disruptive in some sense. That somebody built their business around the 10 blue links model. People out there said, hey, look, Google is providing this great service. This is a way that we can get access to consumers. If we can figure out how to show up in those search results, then Google will send users to us and we can profit from them. When Google innovates and comes along and starts providing that answer, people aren't leaving Google's page anymore. Now they're getting their answers on Google's page and they aren't going to these other pages. And those other people who were providing information via Google, maybe they're going out of business. It's definitely disruptive to them. So the question becomes, how do we ensure that so somebody is getting hurt by this, you could say. Competitors of Google are getting hurt by this innovation that Google made. And it has in the past, literally, and it often leads to antitrust actions. And there's this sense that because we don't always understand innovations, sort of by definition, they're novel, and because they often disrupt the way people were doing business before, they are seen often as a threat rather than as something we should desire. Now, again, when it comes to the very clear technological innovation, a change from an internal combustion engine to an electric engine, I don't think anyone is unaware of the value of that innovation. It's these more subtle innovations where I think this arises. And it is around those subtle innovations, and especially the way companies organize their business, that antitrust enforcement, competition enforcement comes about. And it presents this really basically, in some ways, the fundamental problem of all antitrust enforcement, and which is protecting the market, ensuring that we aren't that companies aren't gaining so much power in a market that they're able to stifle the process of competition, but ensuring that we are not thwarting innovation while we're doing that. And when it comes to these digital markets, you see in a lot of the enforcement that's been happening a real risk of thwarting innovations, because it's those innovations that sometimes, if you're the company that is no longer getting traffic from Google, you don't see that as an innovation. You see that as Google taking your business away. Competitor, Google, taking your business away. That's the basis for an antitrust action. And yet from other perspectives, it's very easy to see this as an innovation. And yet a lot of the enforcement actions we've seen in these digital markets have I would argue, have run on the wrong side of that line, but certainly have not done a very good job of ensuring that there is a real competition problem, and that addressing it, if there is one, isn't causing more harm on the innovation side of things.
Thank you, Geoffrey. But hearing you and going back to your answers, of course, all this brings the DMA into my mind, ex-ante regulations, and we see in jurisdictions trying to regulate digital markets because they're afraid there's going to be a harm on the market, which requires government action. We have been dealing and we have been wanting globalization for many years. We tried to unify law after World War I, then we began with the economic globalization and the trade agreements and WTO. And then now we're seeing that based on these technologies on digital markets, finally we're seeing a space where people can interact freely and without the traditional territorial barriers. But now we're seeing some forces that are trying to do a pushback on this, on this, everything we have pushed for many years. And for these countries like in Latin America, these type of markets provide a unique opportunity because of the low barriers to access the market, because of the new innovations. We talk about the Latin American unicorns, the local unicorns. How do we know what could be the effects? I mean, is ex-ante regulation the way to go if you want to foster competition, not thwart competition, if you want to foster innovation? Because we're seeing that basically the market or competition is a process which tries to figure out facts and answers which the government doesn't have, because the market is a better instrument, or has been evidenced as a better instrument. In your experience, what could be a possible solution? What is an alternative? What are the risks involved in this ex-ante process that is being conducted?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on the primary risk, which is a sort of exacerbating of the problem I described a minute ago of interfering too much in markets and stifling innovation. What we find, and that happens, the way I was describing it was through traditional antitrust enforcement. And it even happens there. So imagine how big the risk is when you're dealing with ex-ante regulations, which sweep huge numbers of very different kinds of companies into their orbit, and sort of force them all into a single preconceived idea of how they should behave. In many cases, constraining the amount of revenue that they can earn, which is in some cases the intention of these laws, I think, but certainly constraining them from operating the way they might want to operate. Now, nominally, that's because the way they might want to operate is anti-competitive, and Europe, the first company to enact one of these ex-ante regulations, I guess, had the belief that there's such a high risk that these companies will behave anti-competitively that we need to have some sort of an easier mechanism to enforce our competition laws against them, and that means an ex-ante regulation that takes out a lot of the process, the traditional legal process, and just says, here's the way you have to behave, do this, or we'll fine you billions of dollars. All right, so but the problem is that there are a couple of problems. There's not very good evidence, and this is especially true in developing countries like in Latin American countries. There's very little evidence that these platforms that are the subject of these ex-ante regulations are actually causing competitive harm. Quite the opposite in a lot of cases, I think, especially in Latin America. You find these companies injecting lots of money into sort of startup environments. They have an interest in local developers developing products that work with their platforms. So they actually spend tons of money trying to encourage that kind of economic development. And they're not really, I don't think they're really threatened by most of the companies that are, sort of coming up around their ecosystems. It's not their interest. It's not in their interest to thwart competition with them. It's in their interest to bring them into this broader ecosystem, connecting them more with other parts of the world, and of course, in many cases, connecting them better with their own potential customers and input providers. And so there's very little evidence that there's, if any evidence, that there's competitive harm out there. And there is a serious risk of overly deterring innovation, because you're telling these companies that, hey, if you want to do business in our country, if you want to do business in Colombia, you have to follow these 26 rules that are very different than you have to follow elsewhere. And they will ensure that you can't operate the business the way you think it's best, the way you've learned is the best way to offer value to consumers. Companies won't enter some of these markets, or they will constrain the kind of activity they employ in these markets. And the alternative to that is not, I think, oh, well, so the local alternative to Google will emerge in company A, B, or C. That might happen, but that's wasteful. Google has capacities that are difficult to duplicate, and there isn't great value in trying to duplicate them. There's great value in trying to supplant them with something new and different that is better than Google. But just trying to do it a little bit better is a fool's errand. But that's why AI is so important. And I think some of the innovations in AI have come, most of them I think have come from the United States. But I think in many ways, because it's still a very academic sort of operation that comes from computer science departments anywhere in the world. And you can already see how AI could ultimately supplant the traditional search engine. You can also see how it can complement the traditional search engine. I think that there's a real risk that you will see less of that kind of innovation in places that are stifling the existing companies that have been successful, but are adopting rules that will apply to the non-existent companies yet once they become successful. And we have examples of this in Europe at the very least. I wish I could, Europe is the only place where we have one of these ex-ante regulations really in place. And we've already seen that where it's been introduced, it's delayed the advance of technology. So Google's AI was initially not rolled out in Europe at all. I think eventually it was rolled out later. Their newest innovation in AI, I can't remember, Gemini, I think it's called, the thing they released just earlier this week, is not available yet in Europe. Maybe it will be eventually. And the reason is because of Europe's strict AI and privacy regulations. Meta's competitor to Twitter, Threads, is not available in Europe because of the kinds of regulations it has in place. I think Twitter itself has said that because of the cost of complying with EU digital regulations, it could even exit the European market. And there are lots of examples like this, right? So we know that these regulations are at least delaying the advent of technological advance in places where they're adopted. We don't know that they are actually improving competitive conditions. So we know there's a cost. We don't know there's a benefit. That's a bad model to adopt elsewhere in the world. We should first. I could keep going forever, but also really importantly, even if it were the case that there were some aspects of the European market that, I don't think this is true, but perhaps made an ex-ante sort of regulation amenable, the right kind of approach there, and an approach that would, again, improve competitive conditions without stifling innovation. There is no guarantee whatsoever that those conditions exist in any other countries in the world, any other jurisdictions in the world. So taking that and saying, even if I think it's hard to look at the DMA in Europe and say it's been a success, but even if you did think it was a success in Europe, so looking at it and saying we should have one here really makes no sense, and unless and until you can do the analysis to say, oh yeah, look, actually we have serious problems, and are, you know, we're much better off with cheap and overly aggressive enforcement, and you know, and we're sure that won't deter technological advance. I just don't think there are any countries that can say that, and I don't even think Europe can say it.
It seems to me that it's probably counterproductive because it seems to be increasing dominance by the incumbent firms because it doesn't allow challenges by new entrants.
In some cases, that's absolutely true. Yeah,
it becomes that way.
Yeah.
So finally, to wrap up our session, what would be a message you would leave for policymakers and for enforcers in Latin America facing these challenges of regulating or enforcing competition laws in digital markets?
I think the first thing is asking what the goal is exactly. If you think that you need one of these ex-ante regulations, really ask yourself what you expect to achieve from it. If it's competition policy, if it's more effective competition policy, that's one thing. If it's industrial policy, if it is, you know, sort of structuring the market the way you think the government or whoever it is given the enforcement authority under this law, however they think it should look, I think, you know, you have to really ask yourself if this is the right mechanism for it, if that's what we should be trying to do at all, and if there are better ways of obtaining these objectives. I think industrial policy gets a really bad rap for many good reasons. It is certainly always been problematic in history. It also is occasionally valuable. It's occasionally useful. Sometimes there are national security interests that the market don't exactly efficiently provide, and you know, the government may be best situated to intervene a little bit in the market to try to make sure that certain national security interests are preserved. That's a form of industrial policy. That's very different than structuring a market entirely and saying, well, we don't want firms that get bigger than this, and we only want 6 foreign firms, and we only want 4 firms from this country, and we only want one homegrown firm to grow up because we think it'll have a greater. I mean, this kind of fiddling in the market has always failed throughout history. If that's the objective, whether explicitly or not, of adopting one of these sort of ex-ante regulations, I think it's certainly a bad approach. And I think even if what you want to accomplish is sensible industrial policy, it's not going to help you get there. So I think that's the big thing: is ask yourself what the goal is, and ask yourself if this kind of regulation will really help us achieve it.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Geoffrey. This was absolutely insightful. It's evident that you're very interested in these topics, and we hope to have you again here with us at ex-ante. Thank you very much.
I'd be happy to come anytime. Thanks very much for having me.